and good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing for Wednesday, the 7th of May, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Thanks for joining us this morning. We have a lot to get to. We're going to start off with India and Pakistan. Jared, good morning. I for maybe like 30 minutes until my brain exploded last night, I was watching Indian media coverage of the back and forth here between India and Pakistan. And there's a massive amount of propaganda, I think, coming out of both sides here. We'll cover that here in just a minute. I'll let you take it from the top. Why don't you go ahead and give us a sit rep here of what's going on?
Will do. So right off the bat, India and Pakistan are now exchanging fire across the border in their disputed border up in Kashmir after India conducted airstrikes on at least 9 targets that they claim were where terrorist attacks against India had been planned and directed. India did say that they did not target any Pakistani facilities. It was designed to be non-escalatory. The Indian Prime Minister also canceled all of his foreign travel. He held an emergency congressional meeting last night and will hold all party leaders in a meeting tomorrow morning in order to discuss the situation. And they expanded all of their civil defense drills, so those will be nationwide. On the same day that India conducted the airstrikes, the Baluchistan Liberation Army killed 7 Pakistani military members in a vehicle-borne IED attack. And the Pakistani government claims that India is partially responsible for this, and they announced an operation to destroy the BLA. At the same time, Pakistan also claims that India damaged a hydroelectric power plant and dam near Islamabad. The Pakistani province of Punjab, which is their most populous province, declared a state of emergency after the attacks. One interesting thing I found, I went ahead and checked international reactions to this. Generally, there was very little reaction, but Turkey actually came out and condemned India's actions overnight, stating that they risked an all-out war. That was a pretty notable breaking of that trend.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then how is China falling down on this? Because Pakistan is a client state of China. China is also I would say at this point, an adversary of India. What's going on there?
They're broadly supporting Pakistan. They're calling for peace across the region, of course, but generally they want Pakistan to lead the peace efforts.
Mm-hmm. All right. In terms of propaganda, in this part of the world, I trust very little, maybe 50% of the stuff that I see coming out of this. Last night, Indian media, they treated this. There's a little city in Pakistan called Murid-K, and that was reportedly the headquarters of this group called Lashkar-e-Taiba, which carried out the Mumbai swarm attacks. And I think they're maybe implicated. I don't remember if they were the ringleaders of this terror attack in this Indian tourist area, but a couple weeks ago now. But India said they destroyed the Lashkar-e-Taiba headquarters in Murid-K, which I think is pretty significant. They said that it was similar, or it is the equivalent of the U.S. strike on Abbottabad when we killed Osama bin Laden. India also said they killed 600 fighters, I think, from a group called Jaish al-Muhammad, the Army of Muhammad, which would be an Islamic terror group. And they said, but Jared, I'll be honest, I cannot imagine 600 terrorist fighters training at a training camp and remaining there, knowing India was about to imminently attack some of these targets. So that's one thing that Brian says 50%, that much. Yeah, that's one thing it's a little bit too far for me. Also, Jared, Pakistan had previously claimed to have shot down 2 or 5 Indian jets or something like that. We were talking this morning before the show. I think we both kind of doubt that's the case. And why is that?
Yeah, the reports vary depending on which source they're referencing. It's 2 to 5, sometimes it's 3. Nobody's really sure how many. And then sometimes they captured Indian prisoners along with it, and sometimes they didn't. But the only non-Pakistani source I've even seen says that, if jets went down, they went down in Indian airspace, which tracks with India saying, all of our jets were only in Indian airspace. So I don't think any of that actually happened. I don't think any jets went down. I am open to being proven wrong on that. Show me the evidence. That's all I want. Because that would be escalatory.
Yeah, I mean, we would know it if Indian jets went down over Pakistan. There would be videos, for instance, just like any other jet that goes down. The other thing here is the Indian Air Force actually was involved, and are they shooting cruise missiles off of those air platforms? Is that what happened?
That's what they were saying is air launch cruise missiles into Pakistan from Indian airspace.
Okay, so they probably didn't even go into Pakistan
Yeah.
airspace. Okay, gotcha. All right. By the way, Jared, last night you posted a sit rep over on the Early Warning Network app. Thanks for that. And Jared, please do keep us up to date on what's going on here. There was a lot of questions on the Early Warning app last night about where's this going and what's the MLCO and what's the MDCO, what's the most dangerous course of action. Are we going to get into nuclear war here? I kind of doubt it. I don't look at either country as wanting nuclear war. That said, you always get in the case of misreading intentions or misunderstanding intentions. And if either side thinks the other is going to go nuclear, then you're probably incentivized to have that first strike option. Jared, you said previously you think this remains under the threshold of nuclear war. Let's hope so. But any update there?
Yeah, I do think it'll remain under nuclear war. I do, with Pakistan holding India responsible for the separatist actions. That actually is a main concern of mine, just because Pakistan has said if you threaten our existence, we will take our first strike option. So if that operation goes poorly, then maybe. That said, I do expect this to lead to at least a war, though I don't expect it to go nuclear because, like you said, nobody really actually wants that.
Mm-hmm. And then, so if this does lead to war, is India going to invade part of the Pakistani administered part of Jammu or Kashmir? And what is this war actually going to be over? Or are they just going to shoot artillery at each other for the next 3 weeks?
I think it will be over settling this territory dispute and probably ending up with Pakistan trying to get the Chenab River turned back on because we've plotted it for over a week now. The Indians shut down a dam that dried up this river, and that feeds into the Indus River.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about massive amounts of Pakistani agriculture here at risk. By the way, I don't know if you've seen pictures of like aerial photography of Afghanistan, Pakistan. Jared, I know you have, but for the viewing audience, hop on Google Earth and go look at it. A lot of these areas are like arid desert. They're brown, except for the rivers. And you see a lot of green, lush green around the rivers. And that's all these the farms and little plots of land where that's actually arable. And so this is not a case where I'll say Pakistan is extremely dependent on getting water from India so they can grow agricultural products. All right. Any closing words here, Jared?
Nope.
All right. Thanks. We will move on here to Inside the Beltway. Jared, the House passed this Taiwan Solidarity Act. According to the House, this will be the end of the U.S. recognition of the one China policy. There's some doubt, maybe. I don't know if it's going to even pass through the Senate, but the House just passed it. What's going on?
Yes. So this is the second time it's passed the House. It previously passed in 2023, but that was right before the August recess. So I think it probably just got left. There is time to do it. I was talking to Robert in our private chat, and he says he doesn't think it'll pass before the reconciliation bill, but he thinks there's a lot more promise to this since both sides of the aisle are generally anti-China at this point. Okay. And fundamentally, this would just change the U.S. understanding of a United Nations resolution so that that particular resolution no longer affects Taiwan in the United States view. It would break the adherence to a one China policy.
Mm-hmm. All right. This would be a red line for China, but do they have any? I mean, they effectively have no recourse here, except maybe lobbying members of Congress, except I guess lobbying some senators to vote against it here with this elite capture, which we know is happening here in the United States. What do you expect out of China over this, or is this nothing?
I think it'll be a lot of condemnation, but more importantly, I think this is going to be kind of dipping. I think this will be the United States and its allies dipping their toe into the water of how far can we push China. Because if you say, oh, well, none of your, like, you don't have any claims internationally over Taiwan. That's what that resolution is saying there is one China, and China used that to bully smaller nations into recognizing one China. This resolution also gave China its United Nations Security Council seat. I don't think that will change, but at least it would potentially be on the table. I think it'll largely just be condemnation, but this could push Taiwan toward a proper declaration of independence if China doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah, I can see it going there as well. I saw this thing from Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman runs Pershing Square, which is a hedge fund. He's like an extremely successful hedge fund manager. And he said, why doesn't Trump incrementally ratchet up tariffs? He said, look, you raise tariffs 0.5% per month for the next 12 months, and then you raise it at 1% a month for the next 12 months, and then 2% a month for the next 12 months after that. And he's basically saying you ratchet up tariffs until you induce enough pain to China that they start engaging in fair trade practices, or at least they renegotiate these unfair trade practices. And that fundamentally misunderstands what the Trump administration is trying to do. We'll talk a lot more about Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent here in a second, but I go back to this. Bessent was on Tucker Carlson. Again, if you haven't watched it, you should. Bessent was also on Laura Ingraham last night. I just watched that segment. It was very good. Bessent is extremely clear in stating he makes the case far better than President Trump does. But I don't know if Bill Ackman doesn't understand this, or maybe he does. The goal is not to put incremental pressure on China. The reason why we're seeing these tariffs is because I think the Trump administration wants to keep China in recession. They do not want China to be able to continue building their using American money to build their military. We've essentially financed the rise of the Chinese military by running these massive trade imbalances with China. So I think the goal really is to keep China in recession. And you don't do that with the incremental tariffs. You do that with maximum pressure. And I've called it this before. We look at how Trump treated Iran in the first term. With that maximum pressure campaign, we're looking at potentially a tariff wall, basically the Trump administration trying to get all these foreign countries, this U.S. coalition of countries, to also implement tariffs on China. This is a maximum pressure campaign. Yeah, I see someone also say in the chat, Trump doesn't have a lot of time. Yeah, Trump doesn't have 3 years to do this. This is something that I think they have to do now. All right, let's move on here and talk about DOD. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth ordered a reduction of all general officers. What's going on?
Absolutely. So it's actually broken out for 4-star officers specifically. He wants at least 20% gone. And this is in the active component of the military, so the people actually serving as a full-time career. In addition to that, he wants at least 20% of all general officers in the National Guard gone, and he wants a further 10% reduction in all general and flag officers removed in the active duty component. So Hegseth intends for this to streamline leadership by reducing excess general and flag officer positions. And during the House Armed Services Committee readiness hearing yesterday that I covered, all of the flag officers there confirmed that they knew ahead of time that a severe reduction was coming, and they, for the most part, they don't see any kind of issues with this. In fact, the Army's already firing general officers. That was something confirmed by General Mingus. And the only one that said that they could potentially have an impact was the Marine Corps, because they have 2 4-stars. So getting rid of 20% means getting rid of 50. We will see if they get wrapped up into the Department of the Navy, being that they are technically a subservient branch.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting. Thanks for staying on top of that, Jared. Coming up today in the House, what's that? Armed Services Committee, Nuclear Forces and Atomic Energy Defense Activities Programmatic Updates. Jared, I'm sure you're going to monitor that. What do you expect out of this?
I'm not sure what to expect for that. It's normally just an update on like Minuteman readiness and the replacements, but with atomic energy, there's been a lot of talk about small modular reactors, and even some tangential comments over in the hearing I covered yesterday. So we might see some of that. Yeah, I've got the Men's Department of the Navy. Come on now. But yeah, I expect probably some more SMR talk as well.
Okay. And then atomic energy defense, it sounds to me they're talking about protecting nuclear sites in the United States. All right. All right, thanks. Let's go ahead and move on here to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He went in front of Congress yesterday, a House Appropriations Committee hearing, and he warned that the U.S. is, and by the way, you're going to listen to this and say, oh, okay, this is nothing new. However, he did say that the United States is on the warning track when it comes to the debt ceiling. He says, just if you're playing baseball, you're an outfielder, and you're running for a fly ball, he says, we are on the warning track. And when you're on the warning track, it means the wall is not far away. Now, asked what this would look like when the U.S. debt, or maybe if the U.S. debt becomes unsustainable. And I know we're already to unsustainability, but there's a difference. Bessent says there's a difference between being on an unsustainable trajectory, which we are on, and it being imminently unsustainable, which is still into the future somewhere. And Scott Bessent said, quote, well, it would look like a sudden stop in the economy as their credit would disappear, as markets would lose confidence. He said, I'm committed to that not happening. He continues, a tipping point in that sustainability is very difficult to pinpoint in terms of when this is going to happen or when this will become imminently unsustainable. He says, but what is not difficult to pinpoint is a trajectory. I think it's very important not to go on the warning track. He continues, and the debt numbers are indeed scary, but Secretary Yellen and I both agree that it is the debt to GDP ratio that is the important number. He said, we're trying to control both the absolute level of debt, pay it down, but also the GDP, grow the GDP. Bessent also said that he's negotiating deals with 18 major trade partners. He said we could see, I think a lot of people expect a major trade deal with India to be announced this week. The war in India may have sidelined that announcement for a while, but he said 80 to 90% of these major trade deals should be completed by the end of the year, which means it's going to be a while. Now, this matters because Bessent says the absolute dollar amount of U.S. debt is not really what matters. What matters is the debt to GDP ratio. Moody's, which is one of the three major credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P, they previously projected the U.S. debt to GDP ratio would reach 130% by 2035, and they expect budget deficits to continue to expand. But that is understating the case, because not included in that number are the unfunded liabilities. And we're talking about $200 trillion. So a lot of people talk about $37 trillion in debt. Some people wouldn't bat an eyelash at that, but that pales in comparison to the $200 trillion of unfunded liabilities. This is spending that the federal government is on the hook for, but is obviously unfunded to this point. This matters because economies with over 120% debt to GDP ratio historically experience a major fiscal crisis. When they get to 130 to 150%, that is considered to be the point of no return. So 120 is crisis, 130 to 150 is the point of no return. As of the first quarter, 2025, which just ended several weeks ago, or I guess a week ago, it ended in March, rather. As of Q1 2025, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio is approximately 124%. So we have crossed that 120% crisis threshold. Moody says we're going to be to the point of no return by 2035. Maybe that's optimistic. But another reason why this matters is because the U.S. Treasury Department is probably going to have to end up restructuring part of this debt, because $37 trillion is bad. $200 trillion is far worse. This is not something that you can tax out of the U.S. economy. It's not $200 trillion is not something you're going to grow your way out of. It's not something that you're going to be able to print your way out of either. You definitely can't trim budgets to the tune of $37 trillion or $200 trillion. So this is going to be a huge problem. This does not necessarily mean that we're going to have a complete and total economic, financial, and monetary collapse. But what this does mean is that Treasury is eventually going to be forced into having to restructure this debt. That is going to include haircuts. So bondholders are going to lose part of their investments. If you have $1,000 bond, maybe the government says, well, we can't pay you back the $1,000, but we'll pay you back $700. People are getting haircuts. We're probably talking about forced budget cuts, otherwise known as austerity. And this is going to be painful for Americans. I've seen, I will say this last thing here. We'll move on. I've said for many years, there are no good options left. We've run out of good options. There are only painful ones left. And this is something where a lot of people expect complete and total economic collapse and fiscal and financial catastrophe. And yeah, maybe we do get that. I would just say that is the worst case scenario. What's above the worst case scenario is just an extremely painful debt restructuring. It's extremely painful, but it's not total collapse like some people talk about. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on. All right, Jared, in the past couple of days, President Trump has come out and said he wants tariffs on foreign-produced movies, and the Teamsters have come out in support of that. What's going on?
Yes, I thought this was pretty interesting. It was a joint letter from the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, and the Teamsters motion picture division director, Lindsay Doherty. And they issued a statement of support for Trump's proposed tariffs on overseas films. And the union is calling these tariffs support for good union jobs and saying that this is a strong step toward finally reining in the studio's un-American addiction to outsourcing our members' work. So I think they're probably looking at like production studios, animation studios, stuff like that, where it gets outsourced and then put under like Pixar. But we were tracking the Teamsters support for the Trump administration in the election, and here we see it continuing even after the Trump administration was inaugurated. So I thought that was an interesting continuation of the trend. Mm-hmm. All right. And moving on, the toy maker Mattel said that they will continue to accelerate their plans to exit China as part of their response to the tariffs. The company also said they're going to optimize product sourcing and product mix in order to mitigate losses from tariffs before, quote, taking pricing action. Mm-hmm. All right. And we mentioned the House Armed Services readiness hearing yesterday. Just a couple of big takeaways from it. 3 of the 5 branches said that they had met or exceeded their recruiting goals already this year with several months to go, and they intend to build up their delayed entry program, which is basically a step between the reserves and active duty. And the Army is seeing enormous munitions production increases, with the precision strike missiles seeing a 33% gain year over year from last year to this year, with an additional 25% expected into 26. And they also say that their 155 millimeter artillery shells have seen a 700% increase in production and monthly production over these past 2 years. They expect it. They have plans to hit 100,000 shells made per month by the end of the year, and they said it's just a matter of getting these online. The production's already there. Mm-hmm. For the record, the 2 branches that did not mention anything about their recruiting goals were the Space Force and the Air Force. I know the Space Force consistently hits its recruiting goals, so that's at least 4 out of 5. And I don't think the Air Force is normally that far off. So I think for the first time in several years, we've probably seen every single branch hit recruiting goals.
Yeah, let's throw an asterisk on that because, I think in 2024, the Army made a really big deal. The Biden administration made a big deal about the Army hitting its recruiting goals. But that is only because they have consistently, for the past 3 or 5 years, reduced their recruiting goals. Jared, yeah. I don't know if you have the numbers in front of you. I did a Twitter thread on this last year, but I don't recall the exact numbers. But if I recall correctly, the Army only hit its recruiting goals last year because they dropped their total recruiting goals by like 15,000 troops. And that's the only reason why they hit their recruiting goals. It's not that recruiting was up; it's that their goal came down. Do you have any numbers. Is that still the case? Do you know?
I don't have any numbers on hand. I know the Navy did the same thing. I remember covering that. All of the representatives of the armed forces here were just ecstatic, saying, "Yes, we met. We are exceeding. We are, absolutely flying past these goals." So it seems like they are not going to reduce. They are probably going to increase their numbers to get back to what they want um, instead of lessening it in order to check a box.
Mm-hmm. All right.
All right, and moving on to Alberta, everybody knows that the the Canadian elections happened about a week ago, and Mark Carney took over the premiership. But Alberta was a notable outlier, and there's been a lot of talk of secession lately. Alberta's premier, Danielle Smith, held two different conferences this week on Monday and Tuesday, specifically on secession. She stated that she does not support it, outright does not support it, but she is willing to put it to a vote if a petition gets the required 177,000 signatures. That's about 3.6% of Alberta's population. On both days, Premier Smith urged the public not to demonize secessionists either, because she says that it's an entirely understandable position. She actually says, yes, we get it. We understand that there are grievances with what Ottawa is doing. We understand why you are pushing for this. And per Smith, there are two different timelines. The most viable timeline is in the 2026 referendum, but it could be as soon as October. She does think that's going to be too tight just due to required legal timelines. She thinks it won't quite happen in October, but could very easily happen in 2026.
So bottom line here, Jared, is they need about 3.6, let's just call it 4% of the population to get these signatures. They don't have the signatures yet, so this just looks extremely unlikely so far.
So far, yes, but she is saying, I will absolutely stick to the will of the people and put it to a vote if you guys want it. And at the same time, she did say that if a just straight, we will leave Canada question was put to a referendum, she expects 30% would already support. And that is only contingent on if she can get the prime minister to address Alberta's grievances, because that's what's driving that's what's motivating all of this pressure to secede. Is they feel as if Ottawa is unfairly oppressing them, which to me says, even though she intends to lower those numbers, sure, we may see an increase in those numbers if the negotiations fail.
So what is the mechanism? Surely there's not some provision in the Canadian Constitution, or I don't even know what they have, that allows a province to secede. So I don't know, Jared. Seems like it's still pretty outlandish at this point.
I also agree that it's probably not going to happen, but the fact that she is publicly stating, I will support this if you guys want this, even though I personally don't support it, I think gives it some credence. And the fact that
she's trying not to inflame, probably trying not to inflame that part of her province.
She also would not expound on any kind of legal mechanisms because it hasn't been tried, and also it depends entirely on what question gets put forward in a referendum.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. Let's keep moving on here to China. Apparently, they may be talking with the U.S. about ending the trade war.
I think it's going to start with negotiations to see where everybody is, get a much more firm read on that. China confirmed that the Vice Premier Hu Lifeng is going to meet with Secretary Bessent during a trip to Switzerland at the end of the week. This is to negotiate on the trade war and tariff war. And the foreign ministry announcement also included a caveat that, quote, compromise does not earn respect, and only by holding firm to principles and fairness and justice can countries safeguard their interests. So that to me sounds a lot like they are going to do this, but they don't really want to do this, and they don't intend to compromise if they don't have to.
Mm-hmm. All right, so they're negotiating on negotiations.
Yes, but that's still, they're talking. That is still a
forward movement.
That is a forward movement, even if it's a very minor one. And staying on the note of China, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense is reporting that the U.S. is speeding up weapons delivery. And so far this year, they delivered 16 Army tactical missile systems, or ATACMS. Those all arrived in January. 84 long-range guided missiles, 29 sets of the HIMARS, 38 M1 tanks, and 5 missile launch vehicles from the first batch of shore-based Harpoon missile systems. And the Taiwanese Ministry of National Defense is expecting 18 more HIMARS, 20 more ATACMS, and 864 rockets, all to be delivered over 2026 and 2027. So they're expecting a lot more deliveries here in the next basically 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what the HIMARS rate of fire would be in a war between Taiwan and China, but it seems like 864 rockets is a week's worth, maybe. I don't even know.
It does seem slim, but I do caution that the main goal of any of Taiwan in any kind of action against Taiwan from China is not to conquer China; it's to simply stop the invasion.
Well, sink the boats, right? Yeah, sink the boats and whatever for coming over.
So if they can do that, which 864 rockets, tell you what, I would not want to face 864 guided munitions on a boat.
Yeah, fair point. All right, thanks for that. Let's move on here. We'll talk about the last item for today, and this concerns the FDA. So I was pretty surprised to learn, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I was pretty surprised to learn that the FDA for years now, maybe decades, has been announcing these inspections of overseas food and drug plants for years, maybe decades. The new food and drug, new FDA administrator, guy named Marty Makary, there on your screen. He said that FDA is going to begin conducting surprise inspections of these overseas and foreign food product factories while reducing the number of announced inspections. Pretty good development, sounds like. According to a Bloomberg report, food and drug factories in India and China have had weeks to months to prepare previously for these inspections. And they said, quote, and yet they, quote, still struggled and in some cases intentionally obscured problems with production from investigators. So this matters because FDA could end up halting imports from these factories that are not meeting quality requirements. That could put further strain on supply chains for medicine, food products, other key inputs into the U.S. economy and U.S. manufacturing and production, like food production, for instance. Also, this is a pertinent point because I see a lot of people on social media saying, let's just take everything we do in China and move it to India or move it to the Philippines or Vietnam or just move everything out. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. There's a medical study conducted on over 2,400 drugs, and this was over a 10-year period. And the study found that Indian-produced generic drugs were associated with a 54% higher risk of serious adverse effects. And these had to do with supply chain and quality control and quality assurance problems. So without FDA addressing that problem, this argument that you just take all this drug manufacturing in China and you move it to India does not sound like the best solution, especially for importing drugs into the United States. And with that, we'll go ahead and get to your questions here. How does one listen to leftists without fracturing your own teeth? I don't know. You just do it. All right. Is Scott Bessent really America First or a plant? Wasn't he involved with George Soros in the bankrupting of the Bank of England? Yes, he did previously work with at least with George Soros. I do think Bessent is America First. I think he goes on these programs and is either a Hollywood like top tier quality actor, or he really believes this stuff. I look at him and I look at his body language, and I think he really is stating the case. He talks about the United States having this barbell economy. He says we've got a really good financial sector, and if you're in finance, you've done really well. We've got a really good tech sector. It's the envy of the world. And if you're in tech, you've done really well. But he said the barbell in the middle that's lacking are these kind of middle class, mostly manufacturing jobs. And he says that's what we're trying to bring back to the United States. When Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, says, yeah, your kids are going to be screwing in screws into iPhones, I think that's complete. I can't believe he said that stuff. And even with, President Trump, he said the other day, oh, your daughter doesn't need $15. She needs $3. And that was just a really horrific way to explain what they're trying to do. Scott Bessent is far more sophisticated and very clear on this. He just says, look, we're trying to make sure that Main Street does well, and it's not just Wall Street doing well, which we've had for many decades now. But he says we want Main Street. It's Main Street's turn to do well. There is going to be some pain and sacrifice in the interim, but just like being out of shape and getting on a treadmill, yeah, it's going to kind of suck in the beginning, but eventually you will start getting back into shape and things will be getting easier and you'll be healthier for it. So I really do think I'm very impressed by Scott Bessent. I like this guy a lot. Even when he was still at his hedge fund back during when President Trump was still on the campaign trail, I'll track this down and I'll post it over on the Early Warning Network. I'll put in the library, the Intel Vault for you for members. He wrote a note to his hedge fund clients and he explained exactly he explained exactly how he would fix this problem of not only trade imbalances with the United States, but how to bring back that critical manufacturing, how to ensure that there's a middle class future for Americans in the United States. He made a very compelling case. It's an extremely good read, and I will share that with everyone as well. So I think Scott Bessent is an America First guy. I don't think he's a George Soros plant. Regarding this general officer reduction, is it seen largely a popular move with the active components of the military, or does it differ between enlisted and officers between the different branches? Jared, look, I don't know. I got out in 2012, so back then I would have. I don't know if I would have said that's a good or bad thing now. Today, I definitely think it's a good thing. There's just so much bloat in the military. Jared, how would you answer this question?
So I left active duty at the very beginning of 2021, and I think it would have been appreciated to see a lot fewer admirals. That said, I don't have a survey on it, but the fact that all the representatives that were at this hearing confirmed, yes, we knew about it ahead of time and we're working toward it. I think there's a lot of support for it from the 4-star level. Because they did not, again, watching body language, they did not seem upset about this in the least when they were questioned about it. They were saying, yes, we know. Army said, yep, we're working on it. We're firing people, and we expect minimal impact. So I think they're okay with it.
Yeah, it really seems like if you're a high-ranking general officer, you don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of peers, the few, the proud, the general officers. All right. Next question. Does the team think that the conflict with Pakistan and India will likely stay at a low level, with both sides focusing more on saving face with their populace while trying to avoid total war? Jared, I thought it was extremely relevant that India did not strike any Pakistani military sites. This is according to the Indians and the Pakistanis both. They struck. Pakistan said India targeted civilian infrastructure. India said they targeted terrorist infrastructure. Last night on the Indian media, I was watching, and they were showing some of the sites that they struck. Most of them I thought were mosques. So probably like extremist madrasas and mosques and some variation of training camps there. If you're Pakistan says, look, we're not responsible for this terrorist attack. You should not be attacking us, but India is. If you're Pakistan, realistically, what is your response? What can you target in response? Are you going to target the Indian military now? Because that seems highly escalatory.
Well, that was one of the claims that was never verified. It's not that I didn't try to verify. It's just the Indians said, no, this never happened. The Pakistani army said that they had annihilated a provincial level army HQ for the Indians. And the Indians said, no, we never were even targeted. So I think there may be, going forward, we might see some of that. But in general, yes, I think they're going to try to keep this as low level as possible. I do expect it to reach at least an all-out war, because Pakistan is viewing this as unprovoked. They did not take any kind of credit for the Pahalgam attack in Kashmir. They said this is absolutely not us, so they have to respond. And we've seen a lot of formations move toward the disputed area, which is why I think it's going to stay in disputed Kashmir. I don't expect this to go into nuclear war, though.
Mhm. Didn't Pakistan? I read somewhere, and listen, when I say I trust, maybe like 50% of the stuff I read about this so far, this is one of those cases where it's the bad 50%. Didn't Pakistan claim to have destroyed an Indian brigade headquarters? I read that somewhere.
That's probably the same thing that we're talking about here.
Yeah. All right.
And we had one question from yesterday over on the Early Warning Network. This was regarding India's civil defense drills. That including with that was rapid camouflaging of infrastructure, and they're asking how effective that would actually be, which is a fair question. I think that largely has to do with the support infrastructure that Pakistan would have for targeting. If they don't have GPS guided missiles, they can't plug in coordinates to go strike something. So they would actually have to visually verify it, and camouflaging would actually work for that.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, if you have some sort of forward observers or any eyes on calling artillery strikes, it's going to be especially during nighttime. It's going to be very difficult to see those camouflage targets. All right, well, everyone, that's going to do it for today's show. Going to do it for today's morning briefing, but the show does go on over on the Early Warning Network app. We'll be in there all day posting updates. Jared will be monitoring this India-Pakistan thing. If this does actually go nuclear or look like it's deteriorating substantially, we'll let you know over on the app. We appreciate all the support. And with that, that's going to do it for today's morning briefing. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Thanks for joining us. Until then, be well and stay out front.